As librarian of the Royal Irish Academy, I'm delighted to chair today's first session, which is on the theme of custodians. In order to facilitate as much discussion and engagement as possible, what I'm going to do is introduce all 5 of our speakers at the very beginning, leaving time for questions at the end. So our first panel features the curators of archival collections, beginning with Meadhbh Murphy, Deputy Librarian for the Royal Irish Academy, who will speak on Our Future Will Become the Past of Other Women. So I'll now hand over to Meadhbh Murphy. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. I hope you've got a nice cup of tea and coffee before you came in, because it's going to be quite the jump in at the very beginning here. So as you know, my name is Meadhbh Murphy. I'm Deputy Librarian, but I just have to kind of say that I'm masquerading as a librarian. I'm actually a qualified archivist, just to get that in there. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is Our Future Will Become the Past of Other Women. And I'm going to do that by kind of breaking it up. I'm going to tell you about how the idea for this seminar came about, and then I'm going to introduce you to women that are in the collections here in the Academy. And I'm going to draw lines from those women in the Academy here collections to other women that would have been using their collections, and then hopefully make these lines a bit more visible to women in the future to draw on these women's collections. Now, the idea, I think, is encapsulated in the title here: Our Future Will Become the Past of Other Women. I'd love to claim that as my own, but it's not. It's actually the title of a poem by a member of the Academy who passed away a couple of years ago, Ivana Boland. She was a poet, an author, and a professor, and she was commissioned by the Government of Ireland and the Academy in 2018 to write a poem that would celebrate the granting of Irish women's suffrage. So I think this is a great title to kind of summarise what this day is hopefully about. So let's get into it. My first day in the Academy, I walked in, and who do I see but these 8 women on the wall? And I was like, what's this? Especially because they're all holding up something that relates to their field. So as Siobhan said, this was part of the Academy and Accenture's campaign to put women on walls. And as Dr. Michelle Cullen, who is Managing Director and Head of Inclusion and Diversity in Accenture, said, who we see on the walls tells us about what we as a society value, about who is welcome, and about who fits in. So this led to the tagline, you cannot be what you cannot see. And I think it sums it up very well. And with these portraits on the wall, you cannot be what you cannot see. You see these women, you can be these women. So as an archivist, I thought, what about the women that are in archives? The ones that are known, maybe the ones that are hidden. And what about the ones that are in literary and document collections? What about those women? The custodians here among us know about the women in their collections. It's part and parcel of being an archivist or a librarian or a special collections librarian. You know who and what's in your collections. The consultants who come and research and interact with these collections, they know about them as well. Maybe on a much smaller scale of people, but they know about them as well. Then we have the creatives who might hear or stumble across something on Twitter or X, as it's known now, Instagram or something, and then they will come in and they will take inspiration from those collections. But it does feel sometimes that you have to be in the know to know that these collections exist. If you're not in, you won't know. So that got me thinking, what steps can we take to promote these archival literature and document collections, and not just to those in the know, but to a wider, more diverse and probably unaware audience? And how can we as custodians, consultants and creatives ensure that these amazing, fascinating, pioneering and bad women can come back and come into the fore again? How can we make their achievements known on a global scale and foster a new level of engagement with their collections? So not a daunting task at all to take on, but I decided that I would take a bit of inspiration from Martin Luther King, and he says, you don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. So my first step was to discover, well, what women are resident here in the collections in the Academy. So let me introduce you to Catherine Wilmot. Catherine was born in 1773. She's from an Anglo-Irish family in Cork, And in 1801, she went on a grand tour of Europe. And she went with the Lord and Lady Mountcashel. And what a tour that was. Here we have, according to the Marchioness of Derry, a description in the introduction of what she got up to on that tour. So, Catherine had, for instance, dined with Napoleon, conversed with Grouchy, acted as a midwife, narrowly escaped death, and made friends with Angelica Kaufmann, all in 1 year while travelling around Europe. But Catherine was very astute. She could see and she could kind of take in all of what was going on around her. In her letters and correspondence that we have here in the Academy, she's very dry wit. I really wanted to spend more time reading her stuff, but I had to obviously come back and focus on other things. But I'll go back to Catherine. And in her correspondence, she describes the social circles that she would have moved in while she was on her grand tour. And to give you an idea of her commentary on these social circles, I'm going to look at one individual. And that individual is Lord Bristol, the Bishop of Derry. Now, don't relax. You're not going to have to try and read the writing that's going up. I'm going to read it to you to make it a bit easier. But I just thought this is a very, very interesting description that she's given of this particular individual. So she says, Lord Bristol, the Bishop of Derry, lives in the neighbourhood. As his house is an exhibition of fine arts, we went to see it, and were amused as well with its contents. As the singularity of their arrangement, he is the patron of all modern artists, whose wives he not only associates with as his only female company, but he has their pictures drawn as Venuses all over his house. His 3 favourite mistresses are presented as Juno, Minerva, and Venus in the Judgment of Paris. Though he is one of the greatest curiosities alive, yet such is his notorious character for profane conversation, and so great a reprobate is he in the most unlicensed sense of the word, that the English do not esteem it a very credible thing to be much in his society. I'll go on. The last time I saw him, he was sitting in his carriage between 2 Italian women, dressed in a white bedgown and nightcap like a witch, and giving himself the airs of an Adonis. The stories one hears of him are endless, both in the line of immorality and irreligion. And in general, he contrives to affront everyone he invites to his table. However, to counterbalance all of this, he admires the arts, he supports the artists, and he spends such a quantity of money in Italy that amongst other rarities he has purchased, he also purchased friends. Now, if you go onto the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, you get a very different picture of the Lord Bristol, Bishop of Derry. But this is a first-hand account of him, so it adds to this perception that we have or idea that we have of this individual. And I think it's a great way of seeing that these collections can fill out and give more kind of substance to these individuals of history that you would never thought maybe would have met in the first place. But it also gives an idea of Catherine's kind of wit and how she actually took down exactly what he was like and the portraits he had in his house. But Catherine wasn't the only Wilmot sister to go adventuring. Her younger sister, Martha, you'll see here, she was 2 years younger, and in 1803 she became very distraught at the death of her brother, so she decided she'd go off on an adventure. She went from Dublin to London to St. Petersburg to Trotskil in 4 months and stayed for 5 years as the guest of Princess Yekaterina Romanovna Dashkova. We have a colleague of mine here called Konstantin who is Russian, so I've been trying to practice these. Hopefully he's not in the room because I'll probably kill them. And she could be seen there at number 5. So that's the Duchess or the Princess there. Like Catherine, her sister, Martha made fascinating insights into the customs and the ways of life and the higher echelons of Russian society. And we know from her diary that she hung out with quite a high standard crew. Number 1, Prince Dmitry Galitsyn. He was imperial general and statesman. Number 2 is the Grand Duchess Anna Petrovna, who was the eldest daughter of Emperor Peter I. Number 3 is Madame Maria Narishkina, who was mistress to Tsar Alexander I for 18 years. And then number 4 is Count Alexei Orlov, who was general chief under Catherine the Great. So as you can see, it's not your average Joes that she's hanging out with. She's hanging out with kind of high-class society. And she gives another insight into what society was like at that level. So here I've just given an example of her commentary and experiences when she was there for Easter. And what Martha says about the Easter religious practices are, the Eucharist carried with the same ceremonies by the priest was followed by his congregation with lighted tapers. The chanting was gayer, and after he returned to the hall, he repeated the words, "Christ is risen," and the congregation answered, "Most assuredly, he is risen. 'Tis the custom to present eggs and other presents." Now, is Martha responsible for the custom or to blame of Easter eggs arriving in Ireland? You could be and argue for or against that, but within this, you can see that there's customs there that have arrived here, and maybe you never knew why Easter eggs were given. Maybe this could be an answer as to why. I'm sure they maybe weren't chocolate, maybe they were gold or something. But that is a good example of how a tradition that seems quite unusual for us actually has a base in a historical practice in a country far, far away. But within the Wilmot Sisters collection, we get a glimpse of what life was like in Russia through the eyes of a different lady, of a different societal class. So when Catherine, after her grand tour, went to join her sister Martha in Russia in 1805, she was accompanied by a maidservant, and her name was Eleanor Kavanagh. And we're fortunate enough to have 2 letters written by Eleanor back to her family in Cork. And she gives a very different view of what's going on in Russia at the time. So she says, "We have music enough all over this house. 8 men servants sit down with their flutes and fiddles. They call them slaves, though, but never a bit of chain do I see hanging about them anyway. You'd like to see the beautiful new gown I've got. My mistress's sister is to make me a present of a silk one, just out of the shop. I'm very happy and likes my place very much. Miss Henrietta, if you'll go down to the village, you may tell my father and mother that I often think of their advice. Why, I sometimes think 'tis only to put on my hat and cloak and down I might run to the village when I look out of the windows and sees Russia again before my eyes." So she's given a very different view to what the Wilmot sisters would have actually experienced. And in staying with that, I want to highlight another woman who's in our collection, that it's not her collection, but she features in one. And it's because of this that I think it's very important to look at other collections to find who's within them. We know her name and we know that she was very sick, but we don't really know much else about her. And her name is Mrs. Regan. She was on the John Barry emigrant ship going from Cove to Canada in 1825. And the reason we know about her is that she's actually logged in the ship's surgeon's logbook about her sickness. And her sickness, the days start here and they run across. So every few days he is writing what is wrong with Mrs. Regan, how he's trying to help, what mixtures he uses to create recipes and medicines to give her. And then we just have a stop. It just stops. So that's the 3rd of July, and that's all we know about Mrs. Regan from this collection. And the collection belongs to the surgeon, Surgeon William Burney. But if you want to read it further, we actually have the logbook out on display out there. You can read it. The writing is very difficult to read, so I'm not going to do that for you. So you can do that yourself outside. But it made me think, what happened to Mrs. Regan? Did she arrive in Canada? Did she not arrive in Canada? We know from this that she had a husband. Was he there? Did he arrive in Canada? So we have all of this information about Mrs. Regan and her health, but what can we actually say about her after that? And I think this is where archival, literary and document collections can come to the fore. A family in Canada may know or may be related to Mrs. Regan, and they might never have known how she was on the trip over. And I think these collections, especially for people like Eleanor and Mrs. Regan, they give a new life to people that may have been very quiet and maybe hidden before. So next, I'm delighted to introduce the star of Herald. This remarkable, internationally recognized expert on odonata, or dragonflies to the common person, is Cynthia Longfield. So here she is here. That's her there. And she is actually known as Madam Dragonfly. She was born in Belgravia in London in 1896 to an Anglo-Irish family. She's completely self-taught, And at the age of 28, she was chosen to go on the St. George expedition, which followed in the footsteps of Darwin and took a year and a half to go around the South Sea. In that year and a half, she collected insects for the Natural History Museum in London, and she was on islands such as the Pearl Islands, Gorgona, the Galapagos, Tahiti, Easter Island, and many more. But she wasn't only interested in insects. She also took photos of where she was. She took descriptions of the dwellings that natives might have lived in. She described their dress, their costumes. She even noted down native language. And it's this that I think is very important. Here, if anybody was studying anthropology, you have an untapped resource here of islanders in the South Sea from a woman who travelled there in the 1920s. And you maybe wouldn't have thought that it was there, but there's a huge resource for you. And over the next 60 years, Cynthia dedicated her life to the study and understanding of dragonflies. Here we have just some of the material from her collection. She drew constantly various pieces of dragonflies, anatomy of various species of dragonfly. She actually made her own insect killing jar, which we have up here, which is on display as well, because obviously she needed one and nothing was good enough, so she invented her own one. She has 2 dragonflies named after her. I'm not going to attempt to read them out, but one of them is in Brazil and one of them is in the islands in Asia. And then we also have correspondence, which I think is quite interesting, from places that really, you could say, don't exist anymore. So this is correspondence from the National Museum of Southern Rhodesia. So you will also recognize that Cynthia is the lady on the flyer. So here she is over here doing her bit of holding up some kind of lizard thing. Now, I went into her collection and I actually found the reference that she writes in her diary to this exact moment. And she says, the beach was alive with amblies. So I had to look that up, and that's short for Amblyrhynchus cristatus, which are marine iguana. They were very hard to see against the stones, which, as I'm sure you can see, they are very hard to see. I think there's something like 20 around her feet there. But they always gave themselves away by a continuous spitting. This they seemed to do for no particular cause, and usually in the opposite direction to us, but they could spit a good distance. They were mostly very big ones, and when caught and swung by the tail, weighed a lot as to make one's arms ache. So here we have Cynthia holding one by the tail, possibly swinging it, and we have the description on the day of what she was doing. Now, it struck me that that image is very close to one of the images of the 8 scientists that's out in the front hall. And this scientist is Professor Emma Teeling. And I went on to Emma Teeling, her TED Talk. She's a member here of the Academy. And if anyone wants to spend an amazing 16 minutes, go on and listen to Emma's TED Talk about bats. And the link, I think, between, not only similarly in the images that you see, the link between Cynthia and Emma is in the passion and the fascination that they have for their subjects, which comes through from Cynthia's collections all the way today to Emma's research. Now, there's 2 more women I'm going to introduce you to. And these 2 missed each other by 2 years. One died 2 years later, the next one was born. And these are Margaret McNair Stokes. I'm talking about a different lady now. She was born in 1832 in Dublin, and she was from a well-respected family. 2 of her brothers, who people might know, are Whitley Stokes, who is a Celticist, an Irish antiquarian, and her brother, Sir William, who was a surgeon. Margaret was educated by governesses, and she had an obvious gift for art and a passion for Irish antiquities. And here you can see some of her artistic talent. This book, again, is on display outside, so you can take your time to have a good look at it. Margaret, illustrated and took inspiration from the Book of Kells and Durrow for this book, and from nature around Howth for Samuel Ferguson's poem. But as stated in the DIB, Margaret had family responsibilities that meant she was not really free to undertake scholarly work and travel until her father died in 1878. But thereafter, she dedicated herself to the full-time study of ancient Irish art. And boy, did she go for it. She travelled, researched, authored, edited, illustrated, and published numerous works on Irish antiquities. And these images here of the drawing and the photograph are just a tiny example of what's in her collection of what she did. She travelled, she drew, she photographed, she studied. Here's another item from her collection, and this is a really good detailed sketch of the High Cross in Termafeckin in County Louth. And the reason I show this is because the direct link from Margaret's study of this particular High Cross to the next leading female Celticist and Irish antiquarian I want to introduce to you, and that's Francois Henry. Francois, as you can guess from her name, was from France. She came over in 1926 when she was studying Irish medieval carvings, and she stayed. In Francois Henry's collection that we have here, and there's another collection that complements this in UCD archives, Margaret's name pops up all the time. So Francois was always referring, you can see it over there on the, I can't see it there, you can see it, there's Margaret Stokes, M. Stokes. She actually references M. Stokes in her illustrations. She's constantly referring to Margaret and Margaret's pioneering work in Irish antiquities. Francois continued to research, study, and eventually published a major work in 1940 called The Irish Art in the Early Christian Period. And again, according to DIB, this publication broke, and I quote, "new ground untilled since Margaret Stokes in the 19th century." So we have a direct link between the two ladies there. And then we also have Francois' notes on Termafeckin High Cross. And here we have constant referral to Margaret Stokes and her research on the same High Cross. So these are direct links between women of the past, women at the time researching, and hopefully women into the future who are interested in Irish antiquities, dragonflies, travelling to Russia, who knows. But I'm going to finish with one lady, and I'm going to introduce her because I don't know anything about her at all, and I'm hoping that somebody will open my eyes. She's not like the ladies that I've already featured. She's a bad lady. And I have a feeling that she might actually fit in quite well with the Bad Bridget's project that was run by Dr. Leanne McCormack and Dr. Elaine Farrell. If you haven't seen or listened to that podcast, I would highly recommend that you listen to the Bad Bridget's podcast. As it says there, it looks at the criminal and deviant Irish women that went to America. And let me tell you this, there's a lot more of them than there is the successful, popular Irish women. And they're more interesting. So, to finish off, the woman I want to read to you is a lady who appears in none other than the journal of Daniel O'Connell, the Liberator, that we have here in the Academy. This journal, I think, is quite funny because it doesn't really refer to law or his cases very much. It's more a social life and what he gets up to and how he goes out for days on end and then comes home. So I would definitely recommend reading it. In this, though, he references a lady. And I didn't want to write down what he said because you don't want to put things like this in writing, so I'll read it to you. So he says about this lady, he says, "I dined with O'Regan on Friday and spent the night there. The lady of the house is a fine young woman. She seemed to be partial to me, and I endeavoured to improve this partiality. She is a most debauched woman. She pretended before we parted to have taken a great liking to me. Nay, she acted the part of an enamorata." I had to look that up. That's a person's female lover. "My vanity has not frequently suggested the flattering idea that it may in reality be so. But when I recollect the side of her character which her conversation showed me, I must imagine that she is only an artful woman who meant to take me in. I have no idea who lady of the house is, and I have to do a bit more research into who O'Regan is to find out who this lady of the house is. But that's according to Daniel O'Connell. What I would like to know is what the lady of the house had to say about Daniel. Unfortunately, I don't have what the lady of the house has to say about Daniel, but maybe it'll appear in someone else's archive, someone else's collection. And that's what this is all about, is to try and get these women, and maybe she can counter what Daniel O'Connell says she was up to. So, to conclude, all the women that I've introduced to you today, some of them are prominent, they own their own collections. Some of them are hidden within their collections or within other people's collections. But either way, they contribute in a previously unknown insights, opinions, tales, lives, and they contribute this into our historical knowledge. I think that they deserve their place, not only on the walls, but to be woven into the fabric of our everyday society. Thank you.